Good evening, everyone. So let's have a little chat about WADs. All right, this being the year of IPSC Shotgun World Shoot Qualification, there's been a lot of WAD talk, if you will, because there's a unique restriction in IPSC around using what they call a long-range WAD. All right, specifically the rule is 5.5.6.2. Basically says you can't use a long-range WAD, and that really pertains to or becomes relevant around buckshot shooting, especially in the U.S. Because buckshot, for those who don't know, buckshot is heavy enough that it basically does whatever the hell it wants once it leaves your barrel. So it's very hard to control buckshot, which from an IPSC competition standpoint, I think is why they restrict it, because it's kind of a skill. It's an X factor towards competition. So because it's so wild and it's so hard to control, it can make some interesting marksmanship challenges. So being the innovative sort that we are, the ammo companies have come up with certain types of WADs that help control buckshot patterning specifically better than conventional WAD types. All right, and so that has led to, I would assume, IPSC restricting the use of them. I don't know how long that rule's been in effect. It's been there for a long time, but of course, Americans hardly know their own rules, never mind rules of a sport they haven't really engaged with very much. So being that IPSC shotgun competition is pretty new to the U.S., most people are like, oh, why are we restricting it? It's been around for a long time. You're just recently becoming aware of it. All right. So especially this last weekend after the final qualifier in Nebraska, that range is operated by Hornady Manufacturing. All right, and the joke amongst the match directors there and myself was that I restricted their ammunition. I didn't restrict their ammunition. That would be a dumb thing to do. Hornady and Federal are the two biggest ammunition sponsors, or sponsors period, of shooting sports. No, that would be dumb. However, just so happens that in the U.S., most of the people desiring to shoot buckshot don't shoot IPSC, and they really want tight patterns. So the industry has a solution, and they developed a special WAD for it. However, it's now illegal. The trick here is that it's also a little bit of an American thing. People refer to it by its trade name. So when people start talking about buckshot WADs and buckshot loads in the U.S., they start using a trade name. That trade name is flight control. All right, flight control is a branded product that Federal sells. They're the most prevalent users of it, but they are the ones that push it into the market, and that's the name people know, flight control. All right, and so it also turns out from an administrative standpoint that it's probably the easiest and most compelling way to cheat in our sport right now. So at a match, we did monitor for it, and we checked people, and we caught some people using a long-range WAD. They weren't using flight control, though. So when we tested, one of the things was like, well, I'm not using flight control. I'm not stupid. There are other brands that use long-range WAD. So here's a Hornady shell, and here is a long-range WAD. All right? Now, to understand what a long-range WAD is, first we have to understand what a normal WAD is. All right? And so our friends at Fiocchi here conveniently make a translucent shell so we can see the inner guts of a shot shell. Back here, obviously we have a primer, sits over a powder charge, and then we need to seal in that powder charge so that it can build pressure and push the shot column out of the barrel. All right, really that's all we're doing. We're creating high pressure and path of least resistances to push it out the barrel. So the WAD seals the powder charge and the combustion from the payload and pushes it out the barrel. Now, what controls how your shot pattern develops and spreads is based upon these petals in here and how they they spread. So as this thing leaves your barrel, as these things are all cupped together, all right, and leaves your barrel, as soon as they're free in the atmosphere, the petals spread out, much like a parachute, and the wad falls away from the shot column. The best I understand is that what a choke tube actually is and how it constricts your shot pattern or changes your shot pattern size. A choke tube is the final timing or the final fuse, if you will, but it controls the rate of how fast this opens and falls away. The more of a squeeze you put on this before it leaves the barrel, the longer it takes to open up and fall away from the shot column. That would equate to a tighter shot pattern at whatever distance. And so controlling how fast your wad falls away from the shot column, and here's another example of one. How fast your shot or your wad basically inflates like a parachute and falls away from your shot column, that controls how fast your shot spreads. Now, if you use a conventional wad with buckshot, it will fall away fairly quickly. In most applications of buckshot, it is desirable for the pattern to remain as tight as possible for as long as possible. So essentially, they developed a wad that does not fall away. All right, so this is the end that's near the powder charge. This is the end that has all your pellets in it. And essentially, this thing just barely has a couple little tips that expand a little bit. You can see them flare out there just a little bit. That's about all the expansion you get. All right, so it takes this wad a lot longer to fall away. I don't even know if these things open a lot. I think these might just be seals to orient it in the shell and to hold everything in place and go down the barrel. But the idea of a flight control wad is it does not have pedals. It does not have pedals to open up and fall away. So this will take much longer. This is as long as they can engineer one to fall away so that it doesn't do what this does, but still seals the powder charge, so you still get a good velocity and still flies true. So this is what we're talking about as a long range wad. It looks much different than either of these conventional wads. Now, have it from a pretty good source that would know. This was originally a Hornady technology, or Hornady bought the rights to it initially, didn't do anything with it. When the patent expired, I believe Hornady either sold the rights or Federal made their own to be what we recognize today as flight control. But the two most common commercial variants of this are flight control, and Hornady calls it Versatite. So when we were testing this at a match in the US, it's commonly known as, these type of wads are called flight control wads. So people are looking for non-flight control buckshot. And when you're testing for it, you're just like, are you using flight control? They're like, no, I'm not using flight control. And they're not lying, right? They're not lying because flight control, it says it right on the box. The problem is that flight control is a trade name, all right? Like Advil, all right? So the rule could say, as an analogy, the rule could say you can't use ibuprofen, all right? And everyone would, amongst themselves, discuss that. Okay, well, you can't use Advil, all right? Whatever you do, don't take Advil, all right? Advil is a commercial trade name for ibuprofen, all right? And so if, in this case, it became commonly known that you couldn't use Advil in a sport, and that's the only way people know it, all right? I'm not a medical person. I had to look it up. I really don't know what the other trade names of ibuprofen are. So I just think of Advil as Advil. So I could be saying, well, I'm not using Advil, but I kind of have some inflammation and some ailments. I need something else. So you could be using Motrin. All right. So I could come up to, as an official, if we were playing a game that banned ibuprofen, I could say, are you using ibuprofen? And you'd say, no, I'm not on Advil. I'm like, okay. And what are you using? And I hand them a bottle of Motrin. They're like, This is ibuprofen. It's like, it's not flight control. You're right, it's not flight control. It's Motrin. Motrin is ibuprofen. Advil is ibuprofen. Same way in that Versatite is not flight control and flight control is not Versatite. They are both, however, long-range wads. Now, so this is what IPSC is not allowing you to use. It is in other shells, some turkey hunting shells. All right, where, you know, in turkey hunting, it's fairly prevalent that they want a really tight pattern. So you'll see it in turkey shells. You'll also see it in everybody's favorite Prairie Storm. That's another Federal product. But Prairie Storm, that's a long range or a high power pheasant load or upland game load. That has flight control wads in it too. All right, so just because you're not shooting buckshot doesn't mean you don't have to worry about flight control wads. There are other commercial loadings that use long range wads. But the difference in them is slight. And I cut apart a Winchester shell here. Winchester has currently marketed as Ranger. Winchester Ranger is about the gamiest wad you can use and get away with. I've been told it's very similar. I haven't actually pulled this one apart yet. I was going to do it all for you on camera because it's just so dang exciting. Watch, it's going to be the same one that I have already pulled out. I'm trying not to make a mess. I already made a mess on here. This whole thing was filled with pellets and silica. So it was packed with silica grains as well. So that obviously helps. Well, not obviously, but that filler helps get them some consistency in their pattern. This right here, this is about the closest thing you can get to flight control or a long-range wad and still be legal. So it looks a bit different, but they use a much stiffer plastic. If you look at this plastic here, this plastic is a lot stiffer. So it's kind of this consistency of plastic in a wad style like this, where this wad's, you can see this stuff's fairly flimsy. Okay, so this is still a pedal style wad. I'm not sure what the technical term is for it, but it does not spread very easily. All right, so this is about as close as you can get to a flight control type wad or a long range type wad and still be legal in IPSC. Most folks have been getting pretty similar results with, here it is right here too, Winchester Ranger. Here, oh, now I tried not to make a mess and I made a mess. Winchester Ranger. That's about as close as you can get to a long range wad and not get in trouble. But when you use a wad that does not spread in the front, does not parachute out and expand, that's a no-no in the sport. Why? Because they say so. And if you want to play the game, that's what you have to do. It's not something we made up. It's if there was anything that we got resounding cry for from the shooters when we put together the series, it was that they wanted to be as close as IPSC rules, equipment rules as possible, because to select the team, they wanted to use as close to IPSC equipment as possible. If we look at the handgun side of the house, Carry Optics division, most popular division in USPSA. The IPSC contemporary of that is Production Optics. Production Optics, you can only have 15 rounds in. Okay, so we're picking a team based on kind of a different game set. All right, we're basically qualifying people with high capacity magazines to play a restricted capacity magazine game. And so people in the shotgun side didn't want that kind of thing. They wanted to be as heads up to IPSC style rules as possible, so we could both acclimate to that environment and pick people based off of how they perform in that environment. That involves not using long range wads. However, finding buckshot that's not loaded with long range wads in the US is fairly challenging. And there's only about, I'll be generous, there's about 150 of us in the country that even care about this. So it's not widely advertised. It's you kind of got to do your own research. But for your all's own information, that is essentially the difference between all these wads, and that didn't even show up very well. But those are the different types of wads you can get in buckshot. I got this wad off of a buckshot stage. All right, so this is a conventional style wad that was used for buckshot. But those are essentially the different types of wads. Again, the reference is Rule 5.5.6.2 in the IPSC rulebook. You cannot use long-range wads. And because we were abiding by IPSC equipment rules for process of selection, that is why we enforced the no long-range wads situation. Now, in USPSA multi-gun rules doesn't say anything about long-range wads. So if you want to shoot buckshot under USPSA rules in multi-gun, flight control up. Anywhere else in the multi-gun world where they like hint at or authorize the use of buckshot, yeah, flight control up, baby. But in the IPSC world, it is specifically not allowed. I believe just to essentially make it more challenging would be my guess, although I don't really know. But there you have it. All long-range wads are not flight control, and flight control while flight control is a long-range wad, not all long-range wads are flight control. This here is Versatite. It's black instead of clear. It is a long-range wad, and by the definition of the rules we were playing this year, this would be an illegal wad. Go ahead and count how many times I said wad. That'll be a fun game. Put it in the comments below. But that's all I have to say about that for tonight. So here's a little lessee lesson on shotgun shells. If you have any other questions you'd like addressed, leave them below. Of course, most of our creative effort right now is going into On the Perf podcast. Every Wednesday we drop a new one. And if you're in the market for anything shotgun related, we are sponsored by Briley Manufacturing. OTP 10 gets you 10% off if you head over there, and it shows them that you like the content that myself and Riser are doing. And with that, that's all I have to say about that.